Mark, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
And we're going to get so much advice and insight as you've given to thousands of people when it comes to being deliberate in their career. But I want to go back before you were this advice giver and expert to a time when you were maybe starting your own career and understand, were you quite as intentional back then as you are now?
No, very much not. And in some sense, I think that gives me an advantage. When we think about other disciplines, about sports. Some people are naturally good at playing football. And they go, oh, yeah, I don't really need to practice. I just show up and do it. And then there's the people who say, I'm not good and I need to work hard. I need to train. I need to practice. And often those people will exceed those who have a natural talent but don't put in the effort. So the fact is, I did not have a lot of these skills early on, and I had to be intentional about developing it. Not only does that mean I continually work on them, but also help me better understand what these explicit skills are, how to break them down, how they work. And that's helped me teach them to students for decades now, and then also do the corporate training and the other work that I've done. So I was not consciously thinking about any of this growing up. I used to eschew these skills, but I think that turned into an advantage in the long run.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think a lot of the time, many of the authors I've spoken to or the coaches I've spoken to, they have gone through the process themselves and then they're then able to empathize and understand what somebody in their shoes is going through. So for example, if they're at point H on the alphabet, they know what it's like at A, B, and C, and they can go back to those times and think, okay, well, just keep coming in this direction. I can help you.
Exactly. So we can take our weaknesses and turn them into strengths.
Yes, and your book is titled The Career Toolkit, and the second part of the title is what stands out to me: essential skills for success that you haven't been taught. And I really wonder, what are the skills that you reflect back on that you wish you were taught earlier on?
I'm going to give you a list of 10. Now,
Okay.
depending on who you ask, this list could be five, it could be 50. It's really just where you're drawing the lines. It's all the same skills no matter who you ask, but it's kind of, do you combine them into one, or do you separate them into smaller buckets? The 10 buckets. And this comes, by the way, I've been teaching these skills at MIT for over 2 decades. And when we started the program, we did research. We've talked to thousands of companies. We've looked at other research people have done. And this was the amalgamation of all that research. So this isn't just, hey, here's a thought I had one day. This is all research based. So here are the 10 skills. They're in three sections. The first is on careers, how to create and execute a career plan. The second are the kind of bucket of these fuzzy, unwritten skills, things like managing your manager, understanding corporate culture, all those unwritten rules of the workplace, learning how to master those. Third is how to interview. Now, we often talk about interviewing for candidates. That's readily out there. How do you answer? What is your weakness? Okay, yeah, we've all seen that. But many of us in our jobs, we have to hire other people. And we've never trained anyone to do that, but it's so important because these are the people that's going to make or break your team's success. So, how to hire people. The second section is on leadership and management. So, there's a chapter on leadership, a chapter on people management, and then a chapter on process management. And then the third section, interpersonal dynamics, that includes communication, networking, negotiation, and ethics.
Well, I'm excited to get into so many of those, Mark. And I think, as you say, they all fall into different buckets. And there'll be listeners listening that are thinking, some of these I feel like I've got a level of mastery on. Some of these I feel like I'm a raw beginner on. And some of these I probably not even considered before as well, because I think there's so much information out there about how to be successful. There's lots of different people telling you, oh, this is the thing you need to work on, this thing you need to work on. And for me, I think sometimes when you listen to a resource like this one and you go through it, it's that action piece off the back of it as well. And I know you're massive on that when it comes to some of the technology you've added to all the different content you've put out there, to actually make sure that when somebody listens to a piece of information like this one, there's something for them to go and do afterwards. There's something for them to implement afterwards. And I think that's why I was drawn to have you on this show.
Exactly. It's just getting the advice isn't enough. It is about implementing it. You can't have a coach say, Here's how you need to pass in football. Go, okay, hey, that sounds good. Okay, I'll try to keep that in mind. You have to actually go out and do it and try it and practice it and hone that skill. And so we need everything to be actionable and not just theory.
You mentioned that as a younger man, you were not somebody that was super conscious about his career plan. Nowadays, you massively advocate for somebody to have a career plan in place. Why is it so important?
So many people go out and say, okay, well, I'm a director of whatever, and I want to become a VP of whatever. And that's it. That's all they do. They go, that's my plan. Become the next thing and sit around and wait for it to happen. And that is insanity. We would never have a project where you say, well, I hope we get this project completed in the next 6 months. Okay, well, there's a plan. Let's all just hope. No, you come up with a project plan. You have regular check ins. Are we on plan? What's changed? Has the goal changed at all? And let's make sure we're moving towards that goal. What's holding us back? What's working well? What do we need to do? We want to apply those same ideas when it comes to our career. Because to sit there and just hope you get that promotion 3 years from now or that next job shows up, that is insanity. And yet that's what most of us do.
Yeah, I do think there's an element of, particularly nowadays with the modern education system, people come out of university in the UK anyway, and they're not quite sure what to do with their degree, because many degrees that people are encouraged to do aren't necessarily a direct transfer into a role. So not everyone's doing engineering or a medical degree or a dentistry degree or a law degree. There's maybe somebody like myself who studied a politics degree. There's many people that do arts degrees, and it's not exactly clear what you might want to do afterwards. And I think for particularly for somebody like that, it's even harder to maybe articulate what a career plan might look like and what the path could be.
So let's make it more concrete. It begins with figuring out where you want to go. Now, for some people, it might be, I want that VP job. For others, younger folks that you're pointing out, you say, well, I'm a political science major. I was a poli-sci minor. What do I do with this? Begin by exploring. And one of the best ways to explore, now, yes, you can listen to shows like this. There are podcasts on people talking about their careers. You can read up on things, but talk to people. When you meet people, go and speak to them and say, hey, tell me about your job. Tell me about your career. What do you do? What do you like? What don't you like? And now, a mistake people make, they think, well, if I'm exploring this particular industry, I only want to talk to people in that industry. Yes, certainly talk to people in that industry. They're probably more aligned, but you might hear things, for example, if you talk to a doctor in the US, what you consistently hear is, oh, I like helping patients, but I hate all the paperwork. I have to fill out so much paperwork for all the invoicing and billing. If you hear, yeah, I'd hate a lot of paperwork too. Okay, you just figured out you don't want a job with lots of paperwork. Whatever industry you choose, paperwork bad. And so, what you want to hear are those little things. Someone says, oh, I spend my time 80% on the road traveling. Now, you might be a salesperson, you might be a field support person, you might be marketing and you're going to trade shows. There's lots of roles that can keep you on the road all the time. And you might say, wow, that sounds really great. You're in different cities and you're building up lots of frequent flyer miles. You might say, that sounds horrible because I'm never home. But once you find that, you're saying, here's what I'm interested in. So the mistake people make is they say jobs are binary. Do I want to be a doctor? Yes or no. Do I want to be a marketer? Yes or no. You want to look at those components. Do I want lots of travel? Yes or no. Do I want to work with a small team or lots of different people over time? Do I want to be an individual contributor or a manager? Start getting those pieces and then say, now what job is going to let me work with a small team and travel 30% of the time and do this but not do that? And then start asking people, how well does your role correspond to this? Or look for roles that you think might. So now that's how we find what we want to do. And then we want to make this clear plan. Well, if I'm here and I want to get to there, but with our project plans at work, we say, okay, I have to do this, then we have to do that, and after that comes something else. Same thing. To qualify for this VP job in 5 years, there's a number of skills I need. And I know this because I've talked to people. I've looked at job descriptions. I've also talked to people about the unwritten parts. And of the 10 things that's needed, I've got five, and two I'm kind of okay at. Maybe I should get better. And there's three I haven't done yet. So now I need to make a plan. When do I gain that experience or hit that achievement? So I've got all 10 by 5 years.
Really helpful roadmap. And I think it is a little bit of a cheat code to almost lift the hood on what somebody's career is really like and understand all the different component parts that tap into that. As you say, you might well be going down that doctor path. And I've heard you speak before about people maybe looking at a law careers and assuming like they're going to spend a lot of time in court, but then they speak to a law professional and they're like, honestly, I'm in court like 1 day a month, and that's like an unusual time. Whereas what maybe we're fed through television or social media is a particular conception of a career. So I really do place a lot of stock in speaking to people who are actually in that space and asking those great questions like you were saying, like what does a day look like for you, what are the perks of your job, what are the downsides of your job, and getting that kind of really in-depth cross section of information that we can then maybe make a fairer judgment rather than just maybe the prospectus we see online or the glitz that we see on social media.
That's right. I usually use law as an example because we all know what lawyers do, but what we see on TV, it's the exciting part. You don't see them spending 8 hours redlining a document. That's not telegenic, but that's what you want to hear about. And even when I say, well, I know what my boss does, but do you? Because you see your boss when you meet with her. But what you don't see is that she spends a whole bunch of time reviewing documents for other teams and signing off and in all these boring cross functional meetings. It might seem cool. Oh, yes, I want to run the team. I like what I do. I'd like to manage the team. But then there's all these other meetings that I didn't know about. So you want to ask people, really get detailed. Tell me on a typical day, where are you spending your time? And what are the parts that you like and you don't like? Because that's what's going to really be important in your happiness in the job.
What would you say to somebody who's really, really struggling for ideas? They don't even know what sectors they might want to talk to in the first place. What could maybe get the juices flowing and the wheels moving in the right direction for them to actually even take some form of action?
You can, of course, just do some job searches and you can find articles on careers in X. But really, for me, I like talking to people. Now, here's the thing, it can be scary. Like, this is weird. Why would I want to do that? Well, they think it's weird. You're actually flattering them. Because if I come up to you, now don't walk up to a stranger on the street necessarily, but if we're in some environment, it's particularly a professional environment, maybe a conference, an event, some after work business event. So, so what do you do? Oh, that's really interesting. Can tell me more. Like, what's a typical day for you? What do you like about it? What don't you like? Because now you're saying, I am interested in you and what you do. And that is everyone's favorite topic, themselves. So when you're asking people about themselves, they get flattered. They're going to be very excited to talk to you about it. And you're going to learn from that.
Mark, you took the words out of my mouth. That's something I've said many times over on the podcast, and I've certainly learned that over 260 odd episodes. Somebody's favorite topic, or at least the topic they should know best to some extent, is about them, how they feel about things, how they spend their time, what they get up to, and I think that's so important. How much flexibility should somebody have in a career plan or a career path? To share from my own story, I all the way through school and in my early days at university wanted to be a sports journalist, so covering football game, well, soccer and rugby matches, and that radically changed throughout my time at university to the fact that I don't have that inkling or passion anymore to write from that perspective. But how much flexibility would you give someone? How much leeway are they allowed?
It's your life, so as much as you want. If one day you say, I totally hate this path, I want a new one, it's your life. You are responsible for it. But here's how you want to find the balance, assuming it's not so extreme. Again, when we think about our projects, when you're doing a big project, a 6 month, a year long project, you're going to create that plan day one. You also know you're not going to follow that plan exactly. It's never going to work out according to plan. Now, one of two things can happen, possibly both. One is that the goal changes. We all know, okay, we're supposed to build this system, and then halfway through, I say, oh, we have a strategy change, or a competitor did something, and now we need to adjust for it. So your goal changes, and that's okay. Or even if you're on the same goal, again, you adjust your plan. Oh, we thought this would take a month, but oops, it's taking 6 weeks. Or we're going to have to find a different way to do this. And that's okay. So both of these will happen to your career plan. Now, here's a very simple thing you can do right now. I'm going to have you pause the podcast, but you have to come back. You're going to pause just for a moment, pause the podcast, and create a calendar event that says, think about my career plan, and set that as a recurring event every 6 months. So now what you've done, just like on your projects, you probably have a weekly check-in or a monthly check-in. How are we doing? Do we need to adjust? You've just set up the same thing for your career. Whether you do it every 6 months or every year or every 3 months, that's up to you. But you've now got that checkpoint. So you have your plan. You're going to follow the plan. We can talk, get more detailed about how to create the specifics of the plan. It's all in the book as well. But you can also adjust that plan as you go. The teaching at MIT was never part of my plan. My plan was to become a CTO, a chief technology officer. I was on that path. And then one day this opportunity was, hey, we're starting this new program. I said, well, maybe I could help. And what I thought would be a one-off meeting turned into my helping to build this program, helping to teach, then doing the book, the app, and being on shows like this. None of that was in the plan, but I saw an opportunity and adjusted the plan.
One of the key things that's stood out from me getting acquainted with your content and what we've just been speaking about just now is that many of the things that become available to us if we choose to deviate from the plan are built on the congruent skills that we're building along the way. So, for example, when you were building towards being a CTO, you were working with all these different people. Of course, you were building the knowledge that you were able to then impart on people when it came to advancing in a career, how they could manage themselves within a career, how they could manage other stakeholders within a career. These were all being added in as a concept from Dr. Meg Jay, who's a previous guest in the podcast and a fellow American for you. She talks about identity capital, and you're shoveling away all these experiences into this bank account of experience that you can cash in later or at least put towards something when it comes to a new career, a new business, something like that. And I mentioned that I wanted to be a sports journalist. So I actually studied a politics degree because it was a written degree. So it showed you could take vast amounts of information and communicate it clearly. But alongside that, I was becoming really good at communicating. Nowadays, I'm a podcast host, but I'm also a sales director. So I'm able to take vast amounts of information that the customer tells me. I'm able to pull it all together into a proposal, put it back to them in the language that they want to reciprocate with and understand, and present my solutions and be convincing about it. And if that's not what somebody's doing in a political environment, then I don't know what is. So it's really, really key that many of the doors that start to get open to us when it comes to the different career paths we can go on are built along the way to perhaps another destination that we're able to pivot from if we're becoming skilled along the way to do that.
Very well said. Let's take two other examples. Let's take sales. Now, sales is an area I really don't like to work in. And I'm never going to take a role where I am the salesperson. And yet, well, I have to sell my book because no one else is going to do it. But even in my day job, even if I didn't have a book, I'm hiring people. Hiring people is selling. You're selling job openings. And I have to sell people, especially in a competitive market. Here's why you want to take this job and not other jobs. And I need sales skills. And when I write up the job description, it can't just be, oh, come show up, do ABC, and we'll pay you money. No, we need to write up something more compelling. Well, guess what? That's marketing. And I've had to develop these other skills, not because I knew explicitly how I would use it, but I thought I'd be better off with them. I used to have lunch every other week with the chief marketing officer of one of my companies. And I worked at marketing companies to explicitly develop my marketing skills. Not that I ever expect to be hired in a marketing role, but I knew that would help no matter what I did. And then, of course, we have these foundational skills like networking, negotiating, everything else. Negotiations, for example, people think, okay, that's where you sit across the table and we say, all right, let's see if we can do a deal. You negotiate when your boss says, hey, I need you to work late for 3 days this week. You say, oh, I really don't want to, but tell you what, I'll do it. But can I leave early next Friday? You just negotiated. We negotiate all the time with our coworkers. They're just not as formal. So these skills, all these different skills are really, as you point out, foundational skills that allow us to be effective no matter where we go in our career.
I'm glad you brought up negotiation, Mark, because one of the headline figures within the book is that if somebody takes your advice when it comes to negotiation, they can make themselves an extra $30,000 a year, which I think anyone listening to this is keen to get their hands on. So, what is that advice when it comes to negotiation? How can it unlock that potential extra earning power?
So let's first back up that bold claim. Imagine the following: you're 25 years old and you've got a job for 60,000 quid. You go and find a new job. And so you're trying to get a little more money. And you get another job, and this job's also offering 60,000 quid. But if you go and negotiate, now we're not talking about you're going to double the amount. You negotiate and you get just 1,000 quid more. Not a huge push. You can imagine doing that. That's a negotiation. It might be a few emails back and forth, might be a phone call. It's going to take you 5 or 10 minutes. You do a little bit of negotiation. If you do that and you take this new job for £61,000, if you do nothing else in your career, if you sit and work at that job for another 40 years, from 25 to 65, asking and getting for £1,000 more, you just added £40,000 to your lifetime earnings. That's it. 5, 10 minutes, you got 40,000 quid more. It's that simple. This is the power of learning to negotiate. And by the way, this applies to all the skills. Now, with negotiation, we gave this example of you just get 1,000 quid more, but obviously you'll have other jobs. You'll negotiate for more than just 1,000. You'll negotiate for more time off or other benefits. So it's going to be a lot more than that. We can do the math on this because we can say, 1,000 times 40 years. If you do the same thing with your leadership, get just a little bit better at leading or a little bit better at communicating. It's not that someone says, here's an extra 1,000 quid because you're such a good communicator, but you're going to stand out. You're going to get more opportunities, more promotions, more job offers, and that's going to compound as well. So for all of these, getting just a little bit better at any one of these skills will have this compounding effect throughout your career. Now we can dive into more specific negotiation skills as well.
Yeah, let's go there, Mark. When it comes to negotiation, what are people getting wrong?
The first thing is that they begin negotiating when they sit down at the table. And we're going to do another sports analogy. When you take the pitch at a football game, you don't just show up and go, oh, hey, let's get in mode to play football now. Okay, yeah, right. You stand here, you stand there. Okay, try to win. For every hour on the pitch, there's 10x hours off the field, training, preparing, getting coaching, thinking about who are we playing, what's their strategy, how do we need to adjust our strategy. That's what we need to do when we negotiate. And by the way, you've done this even if you're not playing sports. When you go up and do a presentation, just show up and go like, okay, I'm going to start talking now. Of course not. You've thought about what you're going to say. You thought about what questions might I get at the end? What do I need to address? So with negotiations, it begins with preparation. It begins with what's my bottom line, BATNA, best alternative to negotiate agreement. At what point, if I can't do this, do I need to walk away? What might the other side's BATNA be? What is the best outcome I want to get to? What are the things I'm willing to trade off? The big things, the small things. What things might the other side be willing to trade off? What might be important to them or less important that we can trade off against each other? So it's all that preparation. That alone is going to put you at a huge advantage.
I'm nodding along so strongly, Mark, because I really believe in Alex Hormozy has made this a lot more popular recently when he speaks about 20 minutes of preparation can make you look like a genius because so many people are so ill prepared. If you do even the slightest bit of prep, you come in and you can be a far more impressive individual. Because I know for myself, when it comes to the podcast, when it comes to my sales pitches, if I've done the prep in advance on the person I'm speaking to and what I'm going to go through with them, I feel an awful lot more confident. I feel more fluent. I feel more able to bring my best self and my personality because I'm not worried about maybe something that I haven't thought about or haven't considered and I haven't prepared for. And that's something that I think a lot of people can unlock when it comes to maybe they soothe that nagging in the back of their head that, okay, I think I've covered most eventualities. And then from there I can be a bit more nimble depending on what comes up. And that's certainly been the case for me. But I hadn't ever used the term BATNA before. And I think that's great to consider what your own walkaway position would be and what your I don't want to say opposition, what your negotiating parties BATNA would be as well. And I like the way that quite often there may be things that we can both sacrifice that aren't terrible for both of us. They may just be an equilibrium. Okay, fine, you're not too fussed about that. I'm not too fussed about this. Let's both give a little bit of ground.
You said something really important that I want to emphasize because it was quick and people may have missed it. You said you don't want to call them an opponent. And that is so important because we often think about The adversary, their opponent. Oh, I'm negotiating against you. We're sitting in opposition at the table. We want to reframe how you look at negotiations as a partnership. Because at the end of the day, if you don't both agree to it, you don't have an agreement. And by the way, it's okay to walk away. If your BATNA is not met, say, hey, you know what? I'm better off not taking this deal. Great, walk away. That's a successful negotiation, by the way. Even if you didn't reach an agreement, it's a success that you didn't make yourself worse off. But I always look at the other party. Now, sometimes it's, oh, we're going to do this partnership. Hey, we're really excited. Sometimes it's, oh, you really have me over a barrel. And all right, I'm not going to get a great deal, but you're still my partner on this because I don't want to look at you as an adversary. That's going to just change my mindset, change how I approach it, and it's going to make it hostile and harder. I always want to see you as a partner. And in the book, I give the example of Sadahara O. He was a Japanese baseball player. I think he was the top home run hitter in Japan, possibly the world. And when asked how he does it, he says, I see the pitcher as my partner in trying to hit a home run. Now, very obviously, that pitcher does not want him to hit a home run. They are literally on opposing teams, but he changed his mindset to not see the pitcher as the opposition, but his partner. And that's what we need to do when we negotiate.
What sort of preparation can somebody do going into a job interview or a career situation where they're going to be negotiating? What prep work can we do so that we feel better going in?
Obviously, we want to think about our own BATNA. Now, you're coming from some position. Now, that might be I'm unemployed. That might be I have a current job. That might be some expectation about what other job offers I either have today or think I can reasonably get in whatever my time frame is. Say, okay, that's going to impact my BATNA. So you want to start with that. And then think about where are you willing to do trade-offs. Now, for a job, it's also important to understand the level of control that the hiring manager has. If this is some small company of 5 people and you're meeting with the CEO, she can kind of do whatever she wants. Oh, you want 2 extra vacation days? She goes, yeah, sure. Okay, we'll give you 2 extra vacation days. I can make that happen. If you want more pay, she has some flexibility there, depending on her budget. If you're going to some big corporation, they might say, look, the rule is 15 vacation days a year. That's it. I can't change it. No matter how much you may want, how much
All the
we may
red
want
tape and
you.
bureaucracy.
Yes. It may be, hey, I have a salary band. I can't go above or below this value or this range. So they may not have that level of control. So understanding the control they might have. Now, you might not know and they might not tell you, but we can get those expectations. At a smaller company, there's probably more flexibility. At a larger company, there's going to be less flexibility. But there may be flexibility elsewhere. If they don't have a work from home policy, then maybe you can say, hey, I want to work from home 3 days a week. Like, well, most people only do 2 days a week. Like, yeah, can I do three? I go, yeah, I guess we can make that happen. So think about the different things you might want, how powerful or how possible those might be given the power and the control of the person on the other side of the table, and then what you're willing to trade off. I might be willing to take less salary for more stock options or vice versa, or no, here's my minimum salary because I've got all these expenses. So once you know that, you're going to be better prepared. The last thing you can do is try to use some resources like salary.com, I think Glassdoor as well. There's probably others in
Yep.
Europe that just say, hey, here's some salary ranges. Now, take them all with a big grain of salt, but still, it's a good starting point to get some grounding.
Agreed. And interestingly enough, I'm glad you brought up things like holidays, work from home, because many people just consider negotiating the top level package when it comes to salary rather than overall compensation package, whether it's a car allowance, whether it's additional holidays, whether it's work from home, whether it's, I don't know, I'm gonna get to finish early on a Friday, I'm doing less hours. I think that's always important to consider what might else be in scope for us to go back and forth on, or for me to get some sort of additional benefits from.
Absolutely. Just think about a simple case. If you've got a job for 100,000 pounds and another job offer for 99,000 pounds, but that gives you an extra week of vacation, would you say, you know what? When I think about, especially after taxes, I'd gladly trade off that extra 1,000 for 5 extra days off, most people would probably say yes. So it's not about maximizing any one area. In fact, when companies ask me, what are your salary requirements? Say, I have compensation requirements, but it's going to be a total package and we have to look at the whole thing because I never talk about salary just by itself.
I think that's a great point, and I think it's important you bring up the ability for somebody to walk away. I know you mentioned somebody might be unemployed, and I think that does differ, their ability to go in with a particular mindset. And I know you've actually spoken previously about your first job post university was working at Harvard, I believe, and you were actually just learning from these professors and almost being paid to learn, which is really, really cool. But for many people listening to this, they'll be at a stage in their career when they're wanting to maximize their earnings, they're wanting to maximize their package. It can sometimes be important to still go into potential new opportunities with an abundance mindset and that ability to walk away. I know, for example, and this is a bit of a rarity, the last three opportunities that have come my way from a sales and a business development perspective, all of those roles haven't quite been right for me and haven't been an improvement on where I am just now in terms of the flexibility and the overall package that I've got. But I have actually been able to explore that open-mindedly and ask those questions to find out what might it look like. And I think when you come from a position of strength, you give yourself much more opportunity to probe and be a little bit more adventurous on what they might choose to offer you if you ask for it.
That's exactly right. And I'm going to go a little outside my field of expertise. Some advice my parents gave me early on. They said, always have 6 months of savings in the bank. That
Mm.
for 6 months, if you lose your job, you can continue at your current level of spending, ideally. You could, if you want, and they said, even try to get a year. So I usually try to keep a year's liquid savings, not in my 401k, that's a retirement plan in the US, but in readily accessible cash. You might say, what's my minimum? Okay, if I don't do vacations, if I don't do a dinner out once a week, but I'm covering rent and groceries, here's my base level. Because when you're saying, you know what, I've got this job offer and nothing else, and in 2 weeks rent is due and my check will bounce, and that's a problem, you're in trouble. You're not coming from a position of strength. If you have 7 job offers, you say, oh, well, hey, now I've got a position of strength and I don't have to take your job. It's easier to walk away unless you meet my needs. If you've got that 6 months of savings, you may not have 7 job offers today, but you say, you know what? I think I can get at least 1 or 2 other job offers in the next 6 months before my money runs out. So you're in a stronger position. And so it comes to preparations, not just at the table. It's, can you strengthen your alternative positions, which for a job just means cash in the bank. So you're not desperate to take that first job. And to your point, it's not just about getting the most money. There's things like happiness. There's things like, is this the right fit? Is this job taking me on the path to the next job and the one after that to get me where I want to be down the road? All that is part of your compensation.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Like, are there developmental opportunities within this role that go beyond the fiscal and the even the lifestyle benefits that will get me to where I want to go to? In the same way, I know I brought up the example of you working in a relatively low paid role post college, post university, but it equipped you so strongly for where you've gone now, and it built your identity capital, so to speak.
To give the context for that, there were some professors at Harvard who were looking for someone to help them develop a course and do some software for them. I sat 3 feet from a Harvard Business School professor for a year. I got personally tutored in finance. Now, there's no direct cash value. And I had to explain what it's like for an next job. I said, oh, but your salary was really low. I no longer talk about my prior salaries at jobs for this reason. I said, yes, but I got so much. I was willing to take the lower salary for this because it's valuable. I learned finance. I can now say I worked at an institution like Harvard Business School and helped develop some of their programming. And it goes back to what we said earlier. We gave the example. We said, if you're looking at a job down the road and there's 10 skills and you have 5 and 2 are okay and 3 you're not yet ready for, you might say, well, if here's where I want to be in 5 years, I need all of these 10 skills. I need the job I take today to start to fill out some of those missing skills or strengthen them. That is valuable compensation to you, even if it's not in the form of cash or cash equivalent. So I always think about the job, what it's giving me beyond just the financial and how it's setting me up. I was a chess player as a kid. I'm always thinking multiple moves ahead. So how does this job get me the next one and the one after that to get me to where I want to be?
Yeah, great points. And I know when it comes to other skills that you've encouraged people to work on, networking is right up there. What do you think people can do to really improve in that area? Because I think post the C19 period and post all this technology that we were exposed to, I think it's a more complicated environment than it's ever been before.
It shouldn't be. People are making it as such.
Okay.
So let's talk about first how you need to think about networking. Every one of the skills in my book begins with a mindset shift and then goes to concrete, actionable things. We talked about one of the mindset shifts with negotiation. It's not your opponent, it's your partner, and you are working together. And then we're going to do the research, and there's other things you can do as well. In networking, the mindset shift people need to make, they have a misconception. Most people think, oh, I need to find a job. Okay, time to network. And we see people, they walk into an event, they go, hey, nice to meet you. My name's Mark. Hey, look, I'm looking for this job. Can you help me? Okay, no, great. Nice to meet you. Next. Hey, you, here's my card. Let me get your card. Can you help me find a job? No? Okay, next. And they're just going with this volume. And we have this mentality of that master salesperson who goes into an event and comes out with 20 business cards in an hour. Oh my God, she's amazing. Well, no, that's not networking. And here's the analogy I like to use. Think about your dating apps. So think about you're saying they're going swipe, 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 and all of a sudden you swipe right and she swipes right as well. And you go, oh, look, I just matched with Kate. Okay, Kate and I matched. Now, if I said to you, hey, Kate's my new girlfriend. No, 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 she is because we both swiped right. See, I've got the match. I say, Mark, she's not your girlfriend. She's just someone who swiped right. If you want her to be your girlfriend, you have to ask her out. You have to get to know her, and she gets to know you, and you build a relationship, and only then will she be your girlfriend. Well, that's the thing with networking. Just because you exchange business cards, just because you added someone on LinkedIn, does not mean you're networked. That just means you both swiped right. And now you need to build that relationship. Networking is about relationships. It's not about followers. It's not about connections. It's not about business cards or your address book. It is about relationships. And that's how you need to think about it. So that's the mindset shift. And whether we're doing it online, whether we're doing it in person, we need to stop looking for, hey, what can I get from you? Can you help me find a job or not? If not, okay, you're no use to me. So let's build a relationship. It's the relationship you have with your friends from high school, not because you said, maybe you can get me a job one day. It's because you built a relationship. And maybe they can help you find a job today or help you with something else, but it was relationship first. And that's what we need to do when networking.
If people are going to be intentional, if not conniving, when, as you said, just charging straight to the person that can maybe get them a job, who should they maybe consider adding to their network from a conscious perspective?
Everyone. A mistake I see so many people make is they only think about direct connections. I've had people say to me, "Oh, Mark, yeah, I'm looking for a job. Thanks for your offer to help, but I work in medicine and you're not in medicine, so you can't help me." Now, this is wrong on two fronts. Back then, I was not working in medicine. Today, I happen to have a client in the medical field. I actually had one a few years ago as well. You never know who in the future may move into your field or out of your field. But the second thing is your network is not just the people you're connected to, it's the people they are connected to. I know lots of doctors and hospital administrators and other people in healthcare because I've just met them over the years. And so you never know who in your extended network might be able to help. So I don't look and say, oh, well, can you do this? Yes or no? If no, you're not of help. Maybe down the road, your extended network can be of help. And if we've built that relationship, you're going to be okay introducing me to your other connections. So we want a very broad and diverse network. And here's the really critical thing. Here's why diversity really matters. I was at MIT and I know a whole bunch of engineers from MIT. It turns out the people I know at MIT have a high degree of overlap. They also know lots of people from MIT. So if I know one more or one less person from MIT, it doesn't help me reach out to significantly more engineers. I also have a friend, Charles Vogel, terrific guy, has wrote some amazing books on community and leadership. Charles went to Yale Divinity School and he is a minister. I don't know a lot of ministers. I know very few. I can probably count on one hand the number I know. But Charles knows dozens, scores of them because he went to school with a bunch of them. He's worked at jobs with other ministers. And so by having Charles, just one person in this otherwise very distinct, disparate field from me, he opens up the access to this whole other community in a way that just adding one more engineer from MIT doesn't really help me. So we want to bring in that diversity into our networks.
I like that because you never know who somebody else might know. And if you make a good impression, as you should, on everyone you can, then it kind of branches things out so much more. What are some of the sources or methods of networking that you would advocate for in 2024?
I am not a fan of going to an event that is just networking only. I Those are usually you find a lot of transactional people. I'm not a fan of BNI or similar types of groups because I find it's very transactional. But you can meet people just about anywhere. You can certainly meet people at industry events. Maybe it's a meetup that's happening after work, maybe it's a conference or other industry event. Great, meet people. You already have something in common. And most people really want to network when they're at these events. They're really looking forward to meeting other people. You can certainly meet people in your jobs. I mentioned I had lunch every other week with the CMO of my company. These are your coworkers. Once a week, grab coffee with a coworker, not necessarily someone from your team, just other people. Say, hey, I'd love to grab coffee with you. I'd love to get to know more about you and what you do, and just go and meet other people. You can meet people through your hobbies and activities. I was a competitive ballroom dancer for many years, and I got to know people from around the world. In fact, I've got a friend from the UK coming a few weeks after we're recording this episode. I met her 20 years ago, but we've kept in touch. And so we want to just through our hobbies and activities, that's going to bring in the diversity because they're not all engineers who do ballroom dancing, or they're not all accountants who go to whatever your religious organization is. So we can meet people that way. And if you're not sure what to do or what to say, in addition to the book on my website that we'll give you at the end, on the blog, I have a list of networking questions, things to say at a conference as icebreakers or to get started or what to do. And they're also in the app, so you can have them with you in your pocket when you need it.
I find things like that really useful, particularly nowadays where it can sometimes feel a little bit forced going to networking events. Like your boss says you need to go to this conference, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to say to all these people? But I'm sure, and when people go to check out the resource, they can find this as well. Many of the questions will just be open questions about what that person does, to open them up about their favorite topic, which is themselves. And then from there, you can just be a human and have a normal conversation. You just need, as you say, maybe that icebreaker, maybe that couple of questions up your sleeve to feel comfortable and to go and perform at your best.
I'll give you a few of them now. There's obviously who do you work for? What do you do? A lot of people don't like that, feels a little contrived. But you're there at an event, you have a common experience. So you can start with what do you think of the keynote speaker this morning? What sessions you're really excited about? What's the most interesting thing you've learned here so far? Those are some really basic questions about something you already know you've got in common. And that's an open-ended question that starts the conversation.
I agree. And one of the important things you pull out in your networking section is around the power of introductions. And you mentioned there knowing a minister who's going to know countless other ministers. So, for whatever reason in your life at that point, you require introductions to them. It's so, so helpful. And I know from my perspective, there's many introductions I'll make to other podcast hosts, or maybe somebody who's been on my podcast that wants to be introduced to another guest. That happens all the time. And by being a connector, I've massively built out my network, but I've also built my value within the network as somebody that can unlock doors that maybe can be closed previously, because many of the guests that you get on podcasts, you go through a rigmarole to reach them, whether it's LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever else as well. And introductions can be such a powerful way for somebody to get their message read by somebody who they maybe would struggle to reach otherwise.
Absolutely. It is amazing how you can position yourself as a key person when you're that connector. I give an example in the book. I had joined this private social network years ago. I was kind of dubious on it. I thought, all right, let me at least meet a few people, do one event. There wasn't much happening in the city. There were no kind of planned events. I said, all right, hey, let's get everyone together for drinks on this night. Okay, that seemed pretty straightforward. Figured I'd get maybe 6, 10 people. We'd show up at a bar, get some drinks. For whatever reason, a whole bunch of people started RSVPing, and soon it became 50 people. I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of a lot of people put in New York City bar, because our bars aren't that big, many of them. And then it ballooned to 250 people. Like, where do you put 250 people? You have to rent out an entire bar to do this. Oh my God, this is I don't know what to do. Thankfully, there was a guy who was a part owner of a nightclub. I said, he looked and said, "Oh, 250 patrons showing up at my club. This would be great." And he reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to do it at my club? I know you don't have a place yet. How about we do it at my club? In fact, we can open up an hour early and we'll do it as like a private party." I thought, oh, thank God. And we did that. But then everyone saw, oh, Mark set us up at this club at a private party. There's going to be an early opening just for us. And all these people, none of us I hadn't met any of them before, because I had just joined this group and I just posted online. But they all thought, oh, Mark's the guy who's bringing this all together. Mark's the guy making this happen. Mark must be really connected. And it's just some guy who kind of got in over my head, but they didn't know that. And they looked like, wow, I am connected to all these. I can make this stuff happen. And so being that connector, it's a really good ROI, because when I connect two people and you both get a lot of value, you both ascribe some of that value back to me. Wow, Mark did that introduction. Mark set us up. It was not a lot of work for me to make that introduction happen, but I get a huge value assigned to me for making it happen.
Absolutely. And I think for people to really make that illustrative, like everyone in every friend group, there's that one person, that guy or the girl that makes the holiday happen, that makes the dinner at Christmas happen when you're all home for the holidays. They're like the driving force. And whether they get the thanks they deserve or not, everyone does appreciate their skill level in making that happen. And I certainly know that quite often that burden falls on me in certain friend groups and circles, where it falls on other people and others. And in the online world, I really do feel like I make an awful lot of connections to and from people, and the goodwill that comes from that is absolutely massive. So not that you should always be optimizing for the principle of reciprocity, but it is a real thing, and people will return the favor down the line. Even if it's not necessarily another introduction, it might be something else that you're like, oh, well, actually, I noticed that you're working in this particular area. Can I pick your brains about it, rather than maybe introduce me to somebody else? And they're like, Colin, yeah, you introduced me to Mark last month, and wow, I had such a great time learning more about his career toolkit, and I sent it on to my company and my students. So I'm more than happy to tell you more about this particular topic because you did that for me.
Exactly. Networking, it's karmic. It is,
Mm.
the more you put out, the more you help others, the more karma that's going to come back to you, the more credit, the more favors kind of owed back to you. Now, I don't keep score. That's why I think of it more as karma. It's just do good and it comes back to you.
Mark, in the time we've got left, I really want to ask you about one of the most important skills, I think, for people for their success. And it's definitely something that's not taught as well as it should be, and that's communication. What are people getting wrong when it comes to their communication right now?
You just opened up a very big, one of the broadest topics. It is that we need to adjust our communication to our audience. Now, most people say that, but it goes to how we engage with them based on mental models. If I go to France to do a talk, ideally I should speak French. Now, unfortunately, I can't, which means I expect everyone in the audience in their heads to translate from the English I'm giving them to French. But if that takes, let's say, 10% of their brain, I'm just making up a number for illustrative purposes, that means they can only focus 90% on what I'm trying to convey, because we've lost a little of it for the translation. And when I communicate with you, even though we're both speaking English, if I communicate in a style that doesn't match your communication style, you again have to do that translation in your head. And in fact, it could be far more than 10%. And so it has to do with understanding people's styles and being able to communicate and match the style to your audience, whether it's a single person or a few people, or if you do have a large audience, then you know you've got a heterogeneous audience and you need to communicate the idea in multiple styles so you can catch different people. And in the book, we don't have time to get super detailed. I break down, here are some different ways you can model it and how to think about it and how to hone these skills so you can now be effectively multilingual, not in English and French, but in these different communication styles.
Big fan of that, Mark, and I think it speaks to something that I spoke about with the gentleman called Thomas Erickson, who wrote a book, Surrounded by Idiots, and it was all about the dispersonality model. And of course, if you've got somebody that in the dispersonality model is very red, they want you to be brief, be bright, be gone. So give us all the information right now, quick, 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 quick. So adjusting your style based on how somebody wants to consume the information so you get the maximum from it is something I've done throughout my sales career and throughout my podcasting time as well, because there'll be certain guests, of course, they want to speak on a podcast, but there's particular ways they want to speak. And I spoke to a lady called Valerie Fridland, who's a linguistics expert, and she was talking about how even in the course of this conversation, Mark, you and I will probably have merged our communication styles slightly, where I'm speaking slightly more American and you're speaking with slightly more Scottish twang, or at least some of the vowels that we're using will have changed slightly because we'll be communicating to basically impress one another to some extent or to connect on a deeper level, which is wild.
I have to do a plug. Valerie's a good friend of mine. Her book, like Literally Dude, is a
So
fantastic
good.
read,
So
and
good.
she is just an amazing person to follow. But you're right about we're merging our styles, whether it's the twang itself, whether it's, you'll notice I use terms like quid, pound, and football. And I was referring to football on a pitch, not football on the US football field, just because I know this audience is more European. Now, that's obviously just specific words, but it's trying to match the style going beyond that. And you gave a great example. You don't want to get into all the details when you're talking to a big picture person, or do big picture when you're talking to a detailed person. That's a really trivial version of what we're talking about, but that's the idea. It's matching to what's the level they're expecting or what's the style.
Yeah, absolutely. If there was one piece of advice you could give somebody to improve their communication skills beyond, of course, matching their style to the person listening, what would it be, Mark?
It's practice. It's like any other skill, you need to practice. And of course, what makes practice more effective isn't just, hey, we're going to go do a scrimmage. It's having the coach at the scrimmage who then says, hey, here's what you did well. Here's what you didn't do well. Here's what you need to work on. So you can practice, obviously, by yourself, but you can get feedback from others after you do a presentation. Ask people. Now, one would just say, hey, how was the presentation? A lot of people give generic answers, or they don't want to say anything negative. So you want to ask more specific questions. How were my hand gestures? How was my tone of voice, if you want traditional public speaking things? Or ask, did I engage this type of style? Because I'm working on having the right level of detail. So I've got some big picture stuff, but I also have some details. So I'm trying to hit both. Did I do that? Could I do more in one or the other? So you want to ask very specific questions and say, look, I'm open to feedback. I'm trying to get better. So please be honest with me.
I think that's so valuable. And I talk all the time about game tape, whether that's in my sales career, I'll listen back to cold calls or I'll listen back to pitches. And then in the early days of the podcast, I listened relentlessly. And I joked about this with Valerie. I very rarely air rum because I've just annihilated that from how I am. I just breathe instead. And I typically have more clarity of thought and more clarity of speech than I did because of the hours and hours and hours that I've done this for. And that didn't come without practice, without feedback, without review, and then without relentless implementation over and over again thereafter.
I did the same thing that was intentional training, where I would watch the tape or do other things. And I've removed most of those filled pauses, the ums, the ahs. I dropped one in earlier when I was trying to act like someone who was a little lost in your presentation. So I'm very intentional about when I may use it. And just as you can adjust your public speaking skills to remove the ums and uhs or to project more, you can do it with these other changes as well. That's more about the substance, that's more about the content and delivery.
Exactly that, Mark. And we've covered an awful lot of ground the time we've had together. I know you cover even more ground when it comes to the actual toolkit within your book. If people want to continue the conversation with you, where should they head towards to get all that good stuff?
I'm going to give you two different websites. The first is the book's website, thecareertoolkitbook.com. On that website, you can see where to buy it, Amazon, of course, and other places, electronic or physical. You can get in touch with me, follow me on social media. I mentioned there's a blog, and the blog has additional articles going deeper on topics, including a whole bunch on networking and these other topics. And there is a whole resources page with a bunch of free downloads for you. I don't even ask for your email address. Take them, use them in good health. because I want you to be more successful. Now, there's a second website as well, brainbumpapp.com. I created the Brain Bump app. It is a completely free app available on Android and iPhone. So you can find it in the stores or go to brainbumpapp.com. The app has all the tips for my book. So imagine you went through my book with a highlighter. This is what you want to remember. Oh, here's the key point. They're all in the app. They are all tagged by topic. So they're in your pocket. What's great is when you're sitting at that conference 2 months from now, you're saying, what were those icebreaker questions? How do I approach someone? You open up the app, you say, I want networking tips. I don't need the leadership or the interviewing right now. I need the networking tips. And they're at your fingertips. So you look through it in the lobby, and then you're ready to go. And not only does it have tips from my book, we have many other books, blogs, podcasts, all sorts of tips from other experts as well. It grows every month. We keep adding new content, all for free. And all of that is brainbumpapp.com.
Very cool, Mark. Fiercely practical. I love it. Both of those will be linked in the show notes. Thank you so much to you for your time on today's show. And thank you to the listener. We'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.